of Alameda County. And I worked with Ron several times back there, and you guys are you're benefiting from a county who, in the leadership, who are committed to really integrating health and human services and different programs. And services for people with developmental disabilities sometimes are in their own silo. Don't you kind of feel like that sometimes, where they're apart from health services, maybe apart from social services? But Alameda County is one of the places which will really lead the way in finding ways to integrate them all together. And so I'm very partial to the East Bay. Not too long, it was only, it feels like a year ago. I think it was 4 weeks ago, Congresswoman Barbara Lee had a town hall for the American Health Care Act and the repeal of the Affordable Care Act, and I was fortunate enough to MC that town hall. Was anybody there by chance? It was at the Ed Roberts campus, and so we had Congresswoman Barbara Lee there and all the assembly members and the senators from this area. And so, and what's so great about the East Bay again is what was a town hall and what began as just sort of an educational opportunity, it turned into like a political rally. It turned into, there's just so much momentum and so much enthusiasm from this area, and there has been for decades now. And so I love being here, so I'm happy to be here with you guys and talk a little bit about California and what's going to be impacting all of us, what's coming down the line, and what are the things we need to be keeping an eye out for, and ways that we can be more and more involved. So I was doing a lot of aging services, and I was doing a lot of health services, but it feels really, really good to be back with the developmental disability services. It feels like coming home for me. I was this policy director for the ARC of California 9 years ago or so, and ran a program called Partners in Policymaking with them. And all through I was 20 years old, and I read a book called Can You Drink the Cup by Henry Nouwen, and in there he speaks about his time in Ontario at what was basically an institution, but how it impacted his life. And not soon after that, I was with a backpack on my back traveling through Guatemala, and there was a church there which somebody asked me to go, from my neighborhood asked me to go and drop something off for somebody who they knew there. So I flew all the way down on this one thing. So I had a real purpose. I only had a backpack, and I took something like this big for the person, so I was going to make sure to get rid of that. And I went to the church, and in there was about, I'll say 40 individuals in wheelchairs. Most of them in wheelchairs, some of them kind of crawling, but most of them in wheelchairs, and maybe about 10 people with them. And it was their time, it was just them in the church, and it was an old church, and they all came up for communion, and I just sat in the back because I was just trying to find somebody, and I didn't want to interrupt what was happening. And as they finished, they each went out through a door on the side, and they kept on going, and they all disappeared. And I said, oh, I'm gonna follow them and see where that's leading. And so I went through the door, and one by one, each person was lifted and put into a bed, and there was maybe 8 people in a room, and I stayed there the whole rest of the day because I wanted to know. And I walked around the whole campus, and there was about maybe 200 people there, living there, all with developmental disabilities, various kinds. And for those who couldn't walk, I'm pretty sure that one time a week getting up for their communion was probably the only time they were getting up out of bed. And at least that was the only time I saw that day. And I went back the next day, and then I went back a year later, and I've gone back a couple times since. And immediately when I got back into the States after that, I was so moved by not only what I'd read before, but then my experience there, that I sought out ways that I can get involved and help. And so all through for about the next 3 years, I was a respite provider. So I was a direct support professional providing respite. And I was very lucky from there to get into special education. And from there, lucky to get involved in the Capitol, because because I was getting more and more interested in the policy side of things and the laws that were impacting the people that I was helping and what was going on there and the funding for the services available. And so through that time, I've been able to work through the ARC of California and other organizations and have had a real intimate understanding of the different laws and policies that are impacting all of us in the room. And I keep thinking back to my time in Guatemala all the time, and I think, what is the difference between some of the benefits that we have here compared to the time when I go, and I've gone back a few times, like I said, to what they're experiencing. And the answer I always come back to is advocacy. I really don't think that there's anything that will move the needle for the individuals in places like that home in Guatemala, the institution there, or continue to move it forward for us here more than advocacy. And it wasn't too long ago that our community was, 80 years, 90 years, it's really not that long ago, where there was the national discussion involved words like eugenics for people with developmental disabilities, which is, let's get rid of them. When there's things, medical practices like lobotomies happening. This is recent history. And so what changes that from where we were then to where we are now, and that's education. And educating people about who we are, who our families are, what's important to us. And so two things that I have seen that have really moved communities is education and advocacy. And so that's a couple of things that I want to talk about today with you guys and hear from you and make it kind of a discussion. 50 years ago, the Lanterman Act, there was a group of moms from this area, right, from the Bay Area, that said enough. We are going to educate and we're going to advocate. And now we have the Lanterman Act, which has been in place, and it's our responsibility to continue to preserve what was put into action by, signed into law by Governor Ronald Reagan 50 years ago, that entitles people with intellectual and developmental disabilities in California to a life in the community and integrated living and opportunities to fulfill the promises that they want to achieve. And so we're gonna talk a little bit about that as well and what we're doing to preserve those elements of the Lanterman Act that was so hard fought for with moms and self-advocates and people from the community. So what I want to start out a little bit with is education, and we're going to talk about what's happening if I can provide a little bit of education, and I want to hear from you guys as well about what's going on, and then we'll talk about advocacy and power and where we're going to get that power from and how we can make some changes. So I have a few things that I want to talk with you guys about what's happening in Sacramento and maybe in DC a little bit as well. I would love to start out, though, however, hearing from you guys, what are some of the issues that are really on the top of your mind that I'll make note of and make sure that we can try to find some time to touch on? Yeah?
Medi-Cal and IHSS.
Medi-Cal and IHSS. And what exactly about Medi-Cal? Health coverage?
Health coverage, the benefits that you get.
And benefits.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah.
Dental services.
Oh, and dental, of course, yeah.
Affordable, accessible housing.
Housing.
Deeply affordable.
Deeply affordable. We might be in the wrong town to talk about deeply affordable, but let's do it. Yeah. Yeah.
Can I add in there also subsidized affordable housing? So just put that in subsidized.
Yeah. Deeply subsidized. Yes.
I'd like to piggyback on the IHSS comments.
Uh-huh.
That the system and the way it's set up is broken, and it's not. As providers, we're required to ensure that we're maximizing that service when we have no control over it, and the wage is minimum wage, so it becomes you know, when providers are paying $15, $16 an hour for direct support staff, it's impossible to find somebody willing to work for minimum wage.
Mhm.
So we're kind of, it's a catch-22.
Great. Yes.
And I'm going back on housing.
Housing.
Is the idea of having an individual with Section 8 and landlords, after building required units when they're brand new buildings, the landlords have the choice of saying, oh, we don't want you after the last tenant is unfortunately having to move.
Yeah.
Well, they don't even have, the landlord has the right to say, oh, we don't want you, we don't want affordable housing, when the program was built with the intent of having. So there's a lot that needs to be
Absolutely.
amended.
Yeah. One or two more? Yeah.
Adult services and supports, particularly for those with significant impairment.
Are there any services in particular that you're thinking of?
Day programming that provides meaningful engagement.
Mm-hmm.
Residentials also include services for folks that have significant behavioral challenges who end up in and out of the psych unit, and we have no place to safely house them in the community. Is a real struggle for us.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
To add to that and to the last two, I think services at all levels for individuals with severe behaviors, and including the short-term crisis intervention services, as well as just long-term services,
Mm-hmm.
housing and daytime programming.
Great. Mr. Sanford, yes.
Impact of federal Medicaid cuts on the land net.
Thank you. That's a softball. I appreciate that. Yeah. Yes, sir.
State budget.
Great. Let's talk about that as well, which is part of Will's comment as well. Never before in my life have I've never worked in DC. I've only worked in Sacramento, but never before has my work involved so much in DC than this year. As you guys can probably imagine, you may feel the same way. I'm paying more attention to what's happening in DC than what's happening in California right now. All right, great. Thank you for educating me about what is important in Alameda County. Housing is obviously one that when I was doing aging issues and health issues, of course, that's top of the list as well for where you guys live. So let me talk about a couple of big items that the ARC of California and our partners are working on. And then I want to, and it'll trickle down to everything that we discussed. So there are, one of our big priorities for the next few years is going to be increasing our advocacy efforts from our self-advocates. And what we are going to be doing is, we know that it is their turn to really lead this charge. And they've been doing it well for a while now. We just want to get behind and help provide support and resources. And so we're going to be seeking grants, and we're also going to be doing a lot of training up and down the state. That's our goal, to help facilitate self-advocates to become more and more involved in the process. And so that's one of the top priorities for us. And number two is, has anybody here heard of the disparity report coming out of DDS, the Department of Developmental Services? I assume that this has been a topic of conversation in this council before. If not, the quick summary of it is that for the last few years, it's been a highlight issue in that people of color are seeing less services provided by regional centers, authorized by regional centers. And the most drastic is the Hispanic community is seeing about 50% less in funding and services than white consumers. And this has been a major topic of discussion within the Capitol, and it's something that we understand is critically important to make sure that there's equity across the system. And so that's going to be a priority for ours as well. Helping to, again, it goes into our training of self-advocates, training of parents within the communities to help advocate for themselves and help advocate at the system, for a system as a whole. Yeah?
Could I just add something, Jordan? So Regional Center in the East Bay just hired their diversity specialist, which we're really happy about. I think it is a priority for Regional Center in the East Bay, but for instance, for our local disparity data, 0 POS dollars have been spent on any Vietnamese individuals. So that's kind of what's going on. But Lisa climbed up it, the Regional Center handles that until Haro now is going to do it.
All right. Thank you. So I just wanted to provide that as a context. There's a couple of the areas that the ARC of California is going to be focusing and using it as sort of the umbrella items. And I want to give a special warm welcome also to Tim Hornbecker in the back, who has just joined us. He was the previous interim executive director for the ARC of California before I joined, and is extremely involved with basically every ARC around California, especially the one here. And he is intimately involved with organizing activities for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities around the country. So I'm happy that he's here to watch over me, make sure I don't screw up or anything. And so what we have done in the past few years is really put a lot of our effort into creating a coalition. And that coalition is called the Lanterman Coalition. And has anybody here heard of the Lanterman Coalition? Yeah, great, okay. So you guys are already up to speed on everything, so I'm going to cut to the chase on a lot of this. So this year we have as a coalition, which is 24 organizations currently, and statewide organizations such as ARCA representing the regional centers, Easter Seals, UCP, the ARC of California, the list goes on and on and on. Various family groups, self-advocacy groups, and provider groups. And we have settled we started the year with about 50 issues, and we actually were able to narrow it down to 5 issues that we were able to put on a piece of paper and send to the department and send to legislators. And these are the 5 issues which have rose to the top for the coalition, which are going to be our priorities moving forward for this year to advocate for. And so those are 5 things that I want to educate you guys about. And maybe you've heard a few of them, maybe you haven't. Some of the issues have been around for a while. But now they're going to be a real priority for us. And then we're going to move on to maybe some legislation, and there's questions about budget as well. So these are the 5 points of the Lanterman Coalition this year. One is continuing the productive, safe, and responsible closure of the developmental centers throughout California. And including making sure that the funding that is going towards the developmental centers stays within our system, so that when a developmental center closes, the funding that is currently going towards that does not just get assumed into the general fund of the state of California, but that money remains for the community to use in our system. This is a big chunk of money. We're talking about $500 million that is currently being spent on the developmental centers. A lot of that is overhead for the buildings themselves. A lot of that is staff for the developmental centers. And if we could make sure that that funding stays for our community, then it would be an incredible injection of money that we desperately need. Last year, the legislature did approve a budget increase, which I'm sure many of you know. And what we are saying is that that helped, but that was not enough. A lot of that money was dedicated towards staff, and that was extremely important and necessary. However, rates for the programs themselves did not necessarily increase for many of them, and the funding for the program is still tedious. There is still, throughout the state, programs which are at threat of closure every single day. Some that have already closed, some are closing tomorrow, some will close next year. if there is not increased funding. So we see, as Governor Brown is very prudent with his money, and as Governor Brown has shown not a high priority of interest in health and human services throughout his tenure as governor, we find it difficult to seek new revenues, although we will be advocating for that, especially next year. But we see this as a funding source which is available and something that can be captured for the community. It's going to be a tough sell, but one that we are making progress on. We're talking with individuals within the Department of Finance and in the governor's office, as well as individuals in the legislature who will help champion this for us so that we can preserve that money for the community. Number two is that one that you guys may be able to relate to as state minimum wages increase. The state has, in effect, an ability to offset that with increases of funding. However, when a local city or ordinance or county, let's say San Diego or San Francisco, increases minimum wage beyond the state minimum wage, the programs do not have an avenue to get increased funding to compensate for that. So their expenses are going up, their revenue is staying the same. This is creating an incredible burden on many programs throughout the state. What we are seeking as the Landman Coalition is a mechanism by which if a local ordinance increases costs, such as minimum wage, that the state will be able to compensate accordingly the programs to offset those increased expenses. Down in San Diego, it's hitting them hard. LA, it's hitting them hard. And so we are, in the Bay Area as well. So we're hoping, and we actually have a bill right now, AB 279, which we're supporting, which is making some headway, and we're going to work right, as of yesterday, we wrote a letter seeking costs to be calculated on how it's impacting the providers, as well as what the impact would be to the state. And so that's a really important one for us moving forward. So because we only see increased costs. I mean, the transportation tax for some providers that looks like it's going to pass is going to be an additional expense for some providers that may have several vans. So increased expenses are going to continue. We hope that we can offset that with increased revenues. A little bit of the technical stuff is that there is a home and community-based services waiver, and this is working with the federal government, and the feds have said that we must comply with certain elements of the home and community-based services waiver, and currently we are not, and if we do not comply, then we will not get paid by the federal government, and this is a lot of money. This is a big make or break. And so the Landman Coalition is committed to working with the Department of Developmental Services on adjusting our system so that it complies and falls in line with the federal government's home and community-based services waiver. There are ongoing stakeholder groups and discussions, statewide groups that are getting together to advise the department. We are involved. The Arc of California is involved in that, advising the department on best ways that they can make sure that the community knows what the changes are going to be and that we can prepare for them so that we're not all of a sudden late and then all of a sudden the federal government comes and slaps a big price tag on us because we're out of compliance. Number 4 is preserving our safety net. And this is specific. We kind of refer to this endearingly to the Barbara Mazie Act. Did anybody in here know Barbara Mazie? Arc of Contra Costa, wonderful. And she unfortunately had to shut down a program because the funding just wasn't there. And what we are saying, and that's happening across the state. And what we're saying is there has to be a mechanism in place where if a program is at threat of closure because the rates for reimbursement just aren't enough to keep it in business, And if all the people who are benefiting from that program are then going to have to go out somewhere else, which is probably going to be more expensive, then there must be a mechanism by which that program can go to the state and say, listen, it's an emergency, we need funding, or we're going to close, and all the consumers which you are serving are now going to go to a more expensive setting, more expensive service, probably a newer service whose rates may be twice as much. This has happened. Tim has an excellent example that he tells out in San Francisco about a transportation service which had to close, and the next best thing in line was something whose rates were twice as high, I think Tim says, and 3 times as high. And that just makes no sense for anybody. But right now there is no mechanism in place. So we are advocating that there is an option to preserve the safety net for when a program is threatened for closure. And then number 5 for our Landman Coalition goals is that there's a rate study which the Department of Developmental Services is required to create, and they're hiring a consultant right now. They're looking at their options, and the rates in the Department of Developmental Services are all over the place. Nobody knows them better, probably even the department, than Will back there. Apparently he's the expert on all the rates in the state. And it is a complicated mess, and so we need to make them more efficient, make them a little more simple, and we need to make them more equitable. And so there's going to be a rate study that's going to happen, and what we hope is that, and what we're advocating for with the department, we've had a couple meetings with them and we're continuing to provide information to them, is that this rate study doesn't just turn into a doorstop. The rate study doesn't come back and they say, that looks great, it's going to cost too much money, we'll put it right here on the table and we'll look at it maybe in a year or so. The rate study that comes back has to be something that can be implemented, something that actually has some teeth to it, something that can make a difference for us. Otherwise, this is a futile exercise and we're just going to go through the motions and nothing is going to come of it. When there is such an opportunity for such great benefit to come from it. And so we're really advocating for them and trying to work with them on making sure that they hire a good consultant. We've already given them a recommendation. The ARC of Tennessee had a rate study which the consumers and the advocacy groups like the ARC thought it was a great process and a good outcome, and it was implemented, and the department in Tennessee thought it was a good study. We've already recommended that consultant to provide their bid and for the job. So we're going to stay on top of them for that, and that's what we're going to be doing as the Landerman Coalition. Those are the 5 points of the Landerman Coalition, and I wanted to start with those because it's an exciting time. While the East Bay, I think, has largely been, has worked well together, that's not always been the case throughout California. There's been provider groups, there's been regional centers, there's been the department, there's been family advocates, there's been self-advocates, and the fact that we all once a month get around a table and have very productive meetings and can all move forward together on singular issues. This is not like it was in 2008, 2009, back when things were ugly in the recession. It was a little cutthroat back then, and we were all sort of fending for ourselves. But right now, being able to all work together is a huge accomplishment, and it's something that we need to continue to feed and foster and grow so that we as an entire system can continue to move forward at the local levels and at the state level and at the national level. So those are the 5 points of the Landman Coalition, and then I mentioned the 2 real high priorities for the ARC of California, which is getting our self-advocates more and more and more involved throughout the state, and then addressing the disparity issue throughout the state. So let's do a little more. You guys educated me on some of the elements that are important to you guys, and let me start touching on a little bit of them. I'll start with the big one, the healthcare debate happening in DC. So the Landerman Coalition right now, literally right now at 3 p.m. I gave them the deadline to sign off on the letter. Today, hopefully tomorrow, we'll be sending out a letter to all our members of Congress that the Landerman Coalition is opposed to the American Health Care Act, which is the latest version coming from Congress to repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare. And we are very concerned about some of the provisions and proposals in the American Health Care Act. The big summary of it is this. We did a really good job, California did, with the Affordable Care Act. We expanded coverage to an incredible amount of people. And we saw, I believe, a 60% drop in our uninsured rate in a matter of 3 years. We really did a great job. And a lot of that is due to the expansion under Medicaid. So more people were eligible to get covered. Because we did such a good job, we also have so much more to lose if it's all taken away. If the Medicaid expansion is, just the Medicaid expansion part of the Affordable Care Act is eliminated, as proposed over time in the American Health Care Act, California would lose upwards of $20 billion from the federal government. Our entire budget is about $120 billion. This is huge. This is a ton of money. We spent years and years and years to get a tobacco tax that got us $2 billion. I mean, lots of fights and hardships, and that got us $2 billion so into the healthcare system. So we're talking a $20 billion loss. So our first and foremost concern is what would happen if all of a sudden in 3 years $20 billion was out of the system. It would be ugly. There's no way around it. Education would have a floor which they would have to be funded at in our state constitution. We would be, all the programs in the Health and Human Services would be on the chopping block. And I'm not trying to be inflammatory or use any scare tactics. This is really sort of me being matter of fact about it. If I was trying to be scare tactics, I'd be up on the table dancing and waving my coat around and telling you that this is really serious stuff right now. But the fact of it is that everything from IHSS to services for regional centers to Medi-Cal benefits would all be on the chopping block if this happened. The other big component of the American Health Care Act, which impacts Medi-Cal, which is of course the same as Medicaid, we just call it Medi-Cal here, is capping benefits. So currently the way it works is that for every person that joins Medi-Cal, we pay 50%, the state pays 50%, and the feds pay 50%. And so it's a partnership there. And so we can add 3 million more people and have no uninsured in California at all. Actually, it wouldn't be 3 million, it would only be a lot less than that it would take at this point. And the feds would cover half of that. In the American Health Care Act, what they're proposing to do is instead of matching, putting a cap per beneficiary, there's two kinds of caps. One is just a lump sum cap called a grant block. We're going to give you, let's call it $50 million, or it'd be more like, we're going to give you $5 billion, and that's all the money we're going to give you, state of California. You can figure out what to do with it. You can have as many people on as you want, or as few people on as you want, but if you have more, you're going to cover 100% of anything beyond the $5 billion that we give you. The other type of cap, which is what's currently in the American Health Care Act, is a per capita cap. It goes back and forth. Who knows what they'll actually end up proposing if the bill moves forward. Per capita cap is based on the previous costs per person in Medi-Cal. We think per person you're spending $40,000. So we will give you half of that. We'll give you $20,000 per person and at a cap, and you are responsible for anything beyond that. So now basically it's shifting all the risk to the state. So let's say there is an epidemic. We don't have to think too far back about the AIDS epidemic, or let's say there is an outbreak, or let's say there is an aging population, as there is, people getting older and older and older, and their expenses are getting more and more and more. Then the state of California will have to cover the costs beyond anything that the feds give us. Why do certain members of Congress like caps as opposed to a match? Because a cap is easy to cut. it's just a set amount of money, you can easily cut it back. If it's a match, it's harder to cut a match than it is a cap, because what are you going to say? Well, we're only going to give you 48% as opposed to 50%, and sometimes they start trying to do that, but it never gets very far. So a cap's easy to cut over time, and that's what would happen. In addition to the Medicaid expansion be eliminated, the cap would cause an additional huge burden to the state of California for costs, again putting pressures on Health and Human Services. And then there's, of course, the different types of benefits. And the pre-existing conditions. In the latest version, which is a little, not just a little, in our minds a lot worse than the American Health Care Act that was almost went for a vote a couple weeks ago. The one that's now being discussed has even worse provisions in that one of them is essential health benefits, and one that really is important to us is behavioral health services. Behavioral health services was a mandated benefit under the Affordable Care Act, under Obamacare, and that's behavioral therapies for children with autism. Specifically, that's a big chunk of what that goes for. It would no longer be that, and others would no longer be an essential health benefit. It would no longer be required for states to make their plans include that. The states could choose whether or not to make their plans do that. We would put pressure on California, of course, to make sure that would happen, and hopefully it would, but it wouldn't be a guarantee. And with all the cuts in funding, nothing's guaranteed if they were to move forward. So that's the American Health Care Act. That is why the Lanterman Coalition, the ARC of California, is opposed to it in its current form. It is really a big deal. There's a lot of other things that are important. If that gets passed in its current form right now, if they pull the members back from recess, they're in a 2-week recess right now. If they pull them back on Monday and they hold a vote and it passes the House, it'll go through the Senate, it'll get signed, then things get a little scary. And I'm trying to just be matter of fact about it. So we at that point would mobilize at our state level. But what most importantly we're trying to do now is mobilize, of course, our members of Congress and advocate for them. And so we have sent out alerts. There's specific Republican members of Congress, of course, none of them in the East Bay. But if you lived in Bakersfield, you could really make a difference. But we're asking you to contact your members of Congress, support. Even the Barbara Lees of the world want to hear from their constituents, know that you got their back. That you're calling them and saying, you go in there and fight, girl. You go get it, make it happen, and represent us well. And then we're also asking members throughout the state to make certain calls and write letters to the members of Congress that are still undecided. And California, believe it or not, has the third most Republican members of Congress of any state. There's Texas and Florida and then California. And yeah, right? And so we're incredibly important in the discussion. We have 5 or 6 Republican members of Congress who are still undecided on this vote. Mostly because now it's getting, we are already putting pressure on them. Now it's getting to be a bill that more represents the Freedom Caucus, more conservative. It takes away even more benefits. And the Republicans in California are feeling the pressure that that's not something that California generally, that's not the direction we want to go in. And so they're feeling the pressure right now, and we're making sure that they do. We're working with a lot of different coalitions and advocates around the state as well, and getting you guys involved on our list, which is what we'll talk about, to help in that effort is critically important. And if we can hold off the 5 or so or 6 California Republicans that are still in the line, the bill doesn't go anywhere. So if we can hold them off and those who are currently in Congress stay with the decision they have, the bill doesn't go. So we are advocating as hard as we can for that right now. Now it is really these 2 weeks, this week, next week during their recess is the time. So getting together and organizing like this, there could be no better time to do it. And so that, all the other issues we talked about, IHSS, Medi-Cal, it all kind of falls under there, right? It all kind of falls under what's happening at the federal level. But let's talk about housing for a little bit as well, and I'll give you a little information about what's happening in Sacramento about housing, and it's also a federal issue, and which is just sucks here. I mean, I live in Sacramento, and so it's better. It's better. It's definitely better. It's not great, but it's better. Man, it's not easy here, and it's from the federal government, it doesn't look like it's going to get any better. HUD is. I don't even know if HUD even exists anymore. And so the relief is going to come at the state and local level. While that doesn't mean we give up advocating at a national level, the real discussion right now is at a state level. And last year there was a big bill moving through the state. It would have provided a total of around $2 billion, I think, for housing. It would have made a big difference. A lot of that money was going to be appropriated from the Prop 63, the Mental Health Act, and they have a lot of money. And so the primary use of the funds was going to be used for housing for individuals who fall under the mental health program, but the housing was going to be there for other individuals as well. But that was kind of how it was being funneled through. A lot of the money was coming from Prop 63. There is a new discussion. That bill was almost there, and then the governor decided to play politics with it, and he wanted basically to give. I'm getting into politics now, but he wanted to give. He thought that local communities and governments had too much say on who can build and who can't build. He wanted more affordable housing to be easily built. He wanted to take away local government's ability to say no to projects. And of course, it's a very hard vote for local legislators to approve because they represent the local communities. And so the legislature ultimately said, we're not going to give on that. The governor said, fine, screw you, I'm taking away the money. We're not doing it this year. The proposals are back, and the housing proposal is back, and we're talking $1 billion+ that could go towards housing. This is something which we're going to be very involved with pushing forward. And it's something which here you guys in East Bay can really make a difference on. You got some Bay Area players who are going to be very involved with this discussion. You have some member Ting in San Francisco who's been very involved. Who can tell me your assembly members and your state senator in this area, in your areas here? I know a few of you can. Used to be. Who took Swanson's place? Nancy Skinner. So Senator Nancy Skinner. No, almost. Rob Bonta is Oakland, and then who's just north of here, who's also a great advocate?
Senator Wachowski, Assemblymember Chu.
Thurman, Tony Thurman, yeah. And then Wachowski, Senator Wachowski's a good one as well, and he talked too much.
That's why we have two.
It gives me a coffee break. It's good. Thank you. And so you have some good advocates here. And so for housing, you really want to be involved with your state legislators. If you want to get involved on a singular issue for the DD community that could really make a difference, is you start pressing on Tony Thurman, on Rob Bonta, on Senator Skinner, on Senator Wachowski, and just tell them how important these housing measures going through the legislature are going to be for you and the impact they're going to have and why they have to fight to make sure it happens this year. That's the issue that you can really, really start pushing these legislators forward on, because there's going to be potentially a difficult vote or two for them to make. Again, having to deal with local ordinances and what can be developed. But they need to know how important, they know, right? They know that housing here is terrible. It was a big issue at the town hall. It was a healthcare town hall. And housing was one of the issues at it. And Congresswoman Barbara Lee was talking about it. Everybody knows. And you can provide all the wraparound services you want, but if they have no place to live, right? So everybody knows. So you need to push And that's one thing we're going to do, and we hope to support you in that effort, is pushing your local legislators here, because you really do have some great champions for some of our causes just here in the East Bay. And we're going to, as the bills develop around what the package of bills will be around housing specifically, because it's going to move forward, just no matter what vehicles they're going to use to make it happen. We'll be getting alerts out. We'll be letting you know. Another reason to make sure that you're with us on our alerts. So those are some of the things I wanted to talk about when it comes to education, and it was great for me to hear. Let me also talk about, there was somebody mentioned jobs, direct support professionals. And this is something which the ARC of California has made a top priority of ours for a decade. And we know that it is difficult to retain great workers because of the wages available, often as a result of rates, reimbursement rates. We also know that it's rewarding work, but it can be a challenging work, and we want to provide supports and resources and education for that as well. So another big priority for us in direct support professionals is a few things. One, we want to create and help facilitate a career ladder. And that's a big part of what we want to do. We want to make sure that people who start out as a respite provider have an opportunity to come up and be, the director of the ARC of Contra Costa, or the director of the ARC of Alameda, or the director of Regional Center of East Bay. What is that career path that can lead one to there? And while there's a little bit of that right now, it's not so clear, and that's something which we want to help put together for the community, so that a direct support professional can see if these are people and an issue in a community that a direct support professional cares a lot about. We don't want to lose them because we can't pay them above, close to minimum wage. We want them to stay in the community. So how do we do that? We also continue to provide training, and we're hoping to expand some of our training for direct support professionals as well, and working with different providers on that. And then, of course, it's about reimbursement rates. If we can continue to fight for additional funding into the system, then we can continue to fight for increased wages. And so direct support professionals are an integral, critical component of our system, right? And sometimes forgotten about how important they are. There's parents, there's self-advocates, and there's direct support professionals. It's kind of and then there's the providers, but how important they are, we all know. So we want to make sure that we are supporting direct support professionals throughout their career as much as possible, and that's something that we're going to continue to do, and that's something which we would love to hear input back as well, and I know you guys do a lot of great things here yourself. If we can help at the state level throughout the state to provide if there's certain resources that we can help provide, if there's certain deficiencies in areas like education or different types of materials, then we would love to help put that together and seek some grants to make that happen as well. So let me talk a little bit about, we talked about education and getting the word out, and part of that is just making sure we all know what's the latest and what's going on. But education, really, without power, without advocacy, is just a lecture hall. It's not going to move a system. It's not going to change people. So that's why we want to talk a little bit about our power as well. This community has a history of being mobilized, of having great advocates. And this is an example of it, right? This room and everybody in this room is an example of that. But that doesn't mean that we can't have more power and really push this forward to where we know the community should be, where we know the state of California and where our country should be. So maybe I'll ask you guys, when you think of political power, when you think of power, who are there people or organizations that come to your mind? Are there Or certain individuals that all of a sudden pop up, or companies, or words? Anybody can think of?
Politicians.
Yeah, like a politician themselves, yeah. Any other groups or people? Yeah.
We have the EELC, the East Bay Legislative Coalition. It includes Regional Center in the East Bay, both councils, Alameda and Johnson County. It includes the State Council, and it includes the Regional Center Provider Group. And we churn out, as Claudia's my church and I staff the EELC, we churn out a lot of letters of support and a lot of action.
That's great. That sounds like a powerful group. Wonderful. Any other people? Anything come to mind? I think of like Koch brothers, or I think of like, right? Or labor, or the NRA, or AARP. Just off the top of my head. So power, where does it come from? Where can we as a community, the developmental disability community, where can we increase our power? Power is really two things. It's people and it's money. And all those individuals like the Koch brothers, well, they don't have a lot of people, but they have money, right? The NRA, they have a lot of people and a lot of money. AARP, they have a lot of people and money. Some groups just have a lot of people. We are not, the developmental disability community, so let's talk about money first. We're not necessarily a poor community, right? I know very wealthy people who have a sibling or a child with an intellectual developmental disability. It's non-discriminatory developmental disabilities. And so while we tend to think, oh, well, let's focus on people for our community and not money. Well, let's not skip it right away. One thing which I think that we can improve on is there is money, there are people with money, and we need to push them a little bit to put their money into the community. Whether that's organizations that align with us, who have an interest with us, or who just care about the issue, or individuals, families. And sometimes, and this is just a comment, commentary, sometimes I think that in our community, for some reason, the families who have a lot of money tend to be less involved, almost purposefully. They kind of want to, sometimes historically, have wanted to hide things. You can even think of like families like the Kennedys, right, who just kind of wanted to hide that they had a daughter a little bit with a developmental disability. And we need to change that. We need to change that culture within our system as well, where we need to make sure that people, poor or rich, feel confident and empowered to be part of this community. And so we don't need to just disregard the money. And so that is a comment for us as culturally to try to change that for people that we know, and organizations that we know where there is money. And now let's talk about people. We do have people, right? 320,000 consumers in the regional centers. 320,000 regional center consumers. Another 46,000 under 3 years old in our system. That's 400,000 people. We have people. Sometimes we just don't represent that when we're in Sacramento or at different organizations or different functions. There have been times and moments in history where we have, but on a regular basis, we're not like labor who can get people organized and mobilized. We're not like some other groups who can get people, even, if you think about aging groups, while they are, they're growing and getting better and better, they have an opportunity, they are able to get mobilized at times and get people to the Capitol. Different groups around, specific groups around SSI, SSP can really get people to the Capitol. Health groups, but nurses, they can get people to the Capitol, right? They can get people more organized in the East Bay if they wanted to. Sometimes the DD community isn't as organized as it should be. You have a statement or question? Yeah.
The great council would be
It's a great one.
powerful powerful organization because everybody gets old no matter where you come from.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
That's right.
okay.
Yeah, and they have a lot of power as well, definitely. And so, how do we make sure that our community has the same amount of power if we could all of a sudden be at the same level as labor? Well, we talked about the money. Okay, so people. More important than anything else about a person, more important than them showing up at a rally in San Francisco City Hall or in the Sacramento Capitol or flying out to DC is making sure that when you talk with somebody or when you're writing a letter that you know your story, right? That you know who you are and what that story is. It doesn't. Every time we go into the Capitol, and who here has testified in the Capitol? Who here has gone to a meeting? Awesome, great. My job, right, is to go up there and give some stats and give some figures and talk about impacts and system changes, and then right when the legislature's about to fall asleep because I'm talking, then why don't you come up there and you tell your story, and they don't remember anything I said. They remember your story, right? And that is what moves the needle. That is what whole systems are changed on. That is what political movements are made on, is because your story inspires people for change. So what is your story? Do you know your story? Have you written it down? Have you told it to somebody? Have you told somebody, why are you a part of this council? Why do you care? What is it that makes you get up in the morning and drive over here and be involved and take action? Are you a parent, a self-advocate? What are the challenges? What are the opportunities you've had? Why are you working for a provider? What are the different reasons that have got you here?
Human stories.
Human stories. And then when you know your story, then let's talk about relationships. Who are you going to tell it to? Relationships are not a one and done thing. When I start forgetting how much work a relationship is, there's one individual in particular who really likes to remind me. Yeah, my wife, right? She makes sure that I know, hey, I'm here too, and it's not just a Saturday afternoon thing. It's an everyday thing. And relationships in our community and our advocacy and our power is the exact same way. We talked about Tony Thurman. When was the last time you have invited him out to something? When was the last time Rob Bonta heard from you in Oakland? When was the last time that Congresswoman Barbara Lee heard your story for the 10th time? When is the last time that Senator Nancy Skinner or Judy Chu, right? Board of Supervisors.
Oh, Chan.
Wilma Chan. Gosh, I knew I had that wrong. She's the other one. Wilma Chan. When was the last time a county supervisor heard your story? And that you asked them to go get coffee. And it's not I went to the Capitol or I went to the county board of supervisor meeting and I told them something at the supervisor something. I didn't went to the city council meeting. I went to the Sacramento ones. It's a relationship, and it's work. A relationship is work. Your spouses know that. Your siblings know that. Your kids know that. A relationship is work. So it's continuing those relationships so that they hear your story not just once but 100 times and different variations, and they see your work and they see what you're doing all the time. And that's what we, right, as the association, as people who try to represent you in the Capitol, that's why I get, as part of my salary, is I get paid to go into the Capitol and to work on relationships with lawmakers, to work on relationships with different coalition members. You're not going to get paid for it. Well, some of you might. But it makes it that much more important because they know I'm getting paid for it. They know that you're probably not getting paid for it. You just give a whole bunch of a shit about this issue and they need to listen why. So that's why your story and your relationships are so important to the power. And then once we have our stories, once we have these relationships, how do we put it all together where all of us as a community, where we have the numbers, the people behind it. And this is one area where I think we have a lot of amazing things happening locally in different areas. This is a perfect example. What Sandy talked about with the coalition between the Contra Costa Council and this council and the regional centers and providers, great example. Let's start putting that together statewide. Let's start putting that together nationally. And what we do is at the statewide level is we engage you with what's happening at the national and especially what's happening in California. And one of our biggest priorities, we mentioned a couple of them, one of our biggest priorities, and we're going to be seeking grants and funding to do this, is we're going to try to continue to organize and create a mobilized advocacy community in the intellectual and developmental disability community. And that's where we all need to be joined together with our stories, relationships, and once we put it all together, that's when you really have a lot of power. And if we can add money to it, all the better. So one thing, and it's a small thing, this is just one thing, but I'm going to pass this around. This is our, the ARC and UCP, the ARC and United Cerebral Palsy have created a California collaboration for lobbying and advocacy efforts. And maybe you're on the email. If you got an alert yesterday about the Affordable American Health Care Act, then you're on the list. If you did not get that email yesterday, you're not on the list. And we invite you to be on this list. So I'm just going to pass this around. Just write your email, especially your email legibly, please, because if I wrote it, nobody would read it. But hopefully you guys have better handwriting than I do. I had a meeting with my kindergarten son's teacher, and he's doing good in this, doing good in that, doing good in this. And then the teacher's like, yeah, but his handwriting is just terrible. And she's like, he can't understand anything. He's got great ideas, but I don't know what they are because I can't read anything he's writing. And there was a report, there were things that I had to write, and I handed it to her later in the meeting, and she's like, oh. And I said, I know. It might be genetic. It might not be my fault or his. Maybe it is. Maybe it's not. Maybe he watches his dad too much. I'm going to try to break him of that. So please write it legibly so that we can make sure to write it correctly into the system. So that's one piece of it, right? When we send out yesterday an alert saying here are the 6 legislators across the Congress, members of Congress across the state that you need to call today about the American Health Care Act. We have 10,000 people who will call them. Right now we have about 11,000 people on this email list. And we want 50,000 people on this throughout the state. I want 317,000 consumers and 46,000 children under 3 years old. Well, the parents of the children under 3 years old on that list. That's what I want. That's what our goal is. And then we're going to have some real power. So, and it's not just what the ARC is doing and getting on our email list, but how involved are you in this group? How involved are you with the coalition between ARC and between Contra Costa and Alameda? How involved are you are incorporating your relationships into those coalitions that you have and getting the county supervisors, getting the state legislators, getting the members of Congress to come and hear from you guys? And so we are going to continue our efforts to create this organized community. And what we really hope from you is, this is my plug for you guys as part of East Bay. You guys are unique in that, and you always have been, in that you are close to the Capitol. There's people in Sacramento, but there's a lot more people out here than there are in Sacramento. And you are the closest shot. You're the biggest city, closest one. And we don't really usually count on San Francisco people making it out because that bridge apparently is just, a son of a bitch or something, and nobody wants to cross it. But, so it's all about you guys. And transportation sucks, right? That's what's really difficult about our community. It can be a big challenge. That's always been our challenge. But the train, it works. And it's accessible. And we'll help, and Will help, and Tim will help get some vans if we need to, right? And we'll get you out to Sacramento. So you guys are so unique because LA's too far. San Jose's too far. Sacramento's got a number of people, but not enough. We need the East Bay people to show up at the Capitol when it's time for people to get to the Capitol. And that's not all the time, right? Maybe once or twice a year. Like twice a year we need you at the Capitol. And that's why you guys are unique. So when you see that call out, please take some extra special consideration and put that pressure on your back and say, we are the East Bay. One of our jobs is to get people to Sacramento. And to mobilize to get people to Sacramento. Because nobody else is guaranteed to do it. So we rely on you to do that. And that's another way. So there's local efforts to organize and to get power. There's the statewide, there's national. We have a DC conference. Tim went there. How many people were at the conference? 1,000 people from across the country flew in for the national conference. Well, that's great, right? 1,000 people took the time and money to fly to DC to be part of this 4-day long, get educated. It's the same thing, get educated, what are the issues, what's going on, and then where's our power? We're all together, let's go to the Hill and meet with our members of Congress and senators. That's great. Can you even consider getting to DC maybe for that? But let's start local here in California and get mobilized and get our power where it should be. So that's what I wanted to talk about is education, a little bit about the issues, and thank you for educating me about making sure housing, as we know, and subsidized housing. We added subsidized to it. Ron did, and part of the bills that are going through the state will include subsidies for housing, especially ones associated with Prop 63 funds for mental health. How wide the funds will be available for those outside of the mental health system. That's a big question still. But like I said, the vehicles for all these, the housing measures are still kind of being formulated. So you got the Lanterman Coalition 5 points, and there may be a time when we need you to write some letters, make some calls to state legislators. Tony Thurman's an important one. Rob Bonton's an important one. Senator Skinner's important. Senator Wykowski. About the money from the DC closures staying in the system, about minimum wage funding, not putting increased pressures on programs, and we can get compensated with increased funding for local minimum wage increases. For the disparity issue, that's going to continue to be the hot topic within the Capitol until we can show that we're making progress on that. It's a little bit of a black eye on our entire system, and not just a black eye, but an injustice to those who are feeling the inequities towards the system, towards services. So we need to do everything we can to fix that in our system. And we're gonna, and you guys are doing, sounds like a lot of work on that already, and I know there's been some money allocated for the regional centers to hire people, and we're trying to be a watchdog on the couple $1 million that went towards the department on helping to fix this, but we think maybe there should be some movement from the community as well. And then so we got some education and a little bit of words on our power and where it can come from and how unique you guys are here in East Bay. And I'm encouraged just to come out here and I've see how much great, I'm just looking at that table, like you guys got a lot going on. You guys are really involved. It's East Bay, right? Of course, it's Oakland, it's Berkeley. Of course you guys got a lot going on. You've been a model to everybody for a long time when it comes to social justice issues. So I love seeing stuff like that. And I just want to stop there, and if there are any questions at all, I'd be happy to answer them as best I can. And I really appreciate you guys having me out. Thanks. Yeah, Ron.
Yeah, I just want to make sure everybody knew about DCAD, Disability Capital Action Day. It's going to be coming up in June 13th. Before that, on June 12th, we're going to have an IL conference. So we're going to try to make it a 2-day. So if you want to get up there, start scheduling visits to your legislators. It's great to do.
June 13th, Disability Capital Action Day. And this is a wide coalition, again, that helps put this together. Thanks, Ron, for reminding me. And the ARC is part of that. And if you want help scheduling visits with legislators, I'm sure that you might already have a system or infrastructure in place here. If you don't, our office will be happy to help you. You can call our office and we'll help. Yes, Mr. Timothy.
There is a copy of those 5 points that he talked about over on the side here.
know that, just in trying to bring them, it's going to be hard to get more money into our system. But there's over $500 million out there right now that we're not getting from the DCs for disability to the developmental centers because they're out of compliance. We have two doctors, Dr. Arambula and Dr. Wood, on our legislative panel. They both asked the Department of Developmental Services, when are you going to be in compliance? We work in hospitals. We know what it means when you have to set a target, you're going to be in compliance. They could not answer them. When we get those people into the community safely and have those monies come back, you're looking at another $500 million into our system.
Yeah, that is a big one that we're really pushing right now. Per consumer in the developmental centers are spending about $200,000, right? 550. How was I?
600.
Keeps going up.
600.
700. Do I see it? No. I was way off on that. I apologize. 500,000 to 600,000 per consumer in the developmental centers, and which is astronomically higher than those in the community, and a lot of that is because of the overhead associated with each person, the buildings, the staff, and each one of them has an IPP already through a regional center. So a matter of transitioning them into the community, while it needs to be done carefully, it needs to be done methodically with a lot of care because a lot of these individuals do have complex needs. However, we know that there's already people with complex needs living in the community, and that if there aren't, the department is going to be building housing for those individuals, purchasing housing. They're doing that right now. However, they also say that that housing will be available for individuals who are in the community as well. So we're making sure that it's done methodically and carefully for those individuals, but we know that the money there's so much money being spent there that needs to stay in our system, and that's what we're hoping to do.
Yeah, and I wanted to just bring up the Landerman Housing Alliance. I don't know if you've been exposed to that group yet.
A little bit, but not a whole lot. So
you'll probably hear from Patty Uplinger. She's Housing Now. She knows you.
Yeah.
And she's our coordinator. And it's a membership organization of housing nonprofits. Many of them are involved in the DC closures and creating the housing, but beyond that, also creating independent living options and doing housing outreach and support, working with affordable housing developers and so on and so forth. But our big push for the next year is to engage DDS, ARCA, and maybe the ARC and the State Council in working on a statewide housing plan for folks with developmental disabilities. We're trying to raise money right now to engage the Corporation for Supportive Housing to kick off and coordinate that effort. And it's just critical that we do something about thinking post-DC closure, because the state system has been so focused on the DC closures, they've forgotten the other 99% of the folks. And we all feel that every day.
Mm-hmm.
So I totally agree. We need to keep those resources in the community-based services once the DCs are shut down. The reason the per year rate keeps going up is we have all the infrastructure, and more people are leaving every day, and it just, those costs per person just keep going up. So those dollars need to be in the community system. The assets, the DC's, the real estate assets need to stay.
Yeah.
We've been unsuccessful in doing that. So I just want to invite you to join the Landerman Housing Alliance efforts.
Great.
And hopefully we can all bring it together, because we're pushing very hard on the housing issue. And this group is also doing a really good job of pushing on the legislative side as far as advocacy and everything. But we need all of the big hitters statewide to get involved, to keep the pressure on DDS, to keep thinking about the community folks in the post-DC world.
Great.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks for the invitation. Yeah, just 4 days ago, it was Friday, I was in the Capitol, and there's a new legislator who's chair of the Human Services Committee, and so she doesn't know a whole lot about our system. We went in there to meet with her and her top staffer for the issue, and we started talking about the system, and she said, yeah, well, what we're really hearing about, what our real concern is right now is There's people in developmental centers and they're closing them, and we want to make sure they're taken care of, and we're like, yes, absolutely. But there's 99.9% of everybody else out in the community. Let's talk about them as well. It's just such a hot button issue. And we're perpetuating a little bit by saying this is one of our top priorities by keeping that funding in there. At the same time, we need to make sure that your stories, which we talked about, are also part of the conversation in the community and what's happening in the community. And we have to educate them, right? We have to educate the lawmakers about what's going on in the community and what's happening, and that's part of my job, is going in there and tell them what's the difference between a developmental center and a regional center and why they're very different, and that not many people live at the regional centers as they may think. It's every year new legislators, and you got to go in and educate them. It's a complicated system sometimes, and that's what we have to do. And then making sure that they are thinking about a post-DC world, absolutely, because it's dominating the discussion right now. Yeah. Anything else at all, or?
Jordan, thank you so much.
Thank you guys.
Let's give him a big round of applause. Thank you very much for all the points that you brought up. I know you can count on the East Bay community for their advocacy. I'm going to be forwarding the email that Jordan talked about, the healthcare one, and I hope everybody writes a letter or makes a phone call.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. And I'm going to find that list. I want it to go around. I don't know if it's still going around. Is it the email list? All right. I don't want that to get stuck somewhere. All right. Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much, Jordan.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Hey, we're also doing a picnic for you, leadership. It's going to be over at Roberts campus. So if you guys have anybody that want to come down.
I believe we have a quorum.
Proud. You guys know about
Yeah.
EPFB,
like we're
so
trying to build
thanks
that
to
up as
everyone
well.
for your flexibility. We're going to revisit the agenda
love to.
at this
Yeah,
point. And
that'd be
if
great.
you could please,
Yeah.
again,
Guy used to.
take a quick look at the February
you out there real
2017
Yeah, of course.
minutes. And once,
Good job.
What got you involved?
I'm with Mission Hope Day Program, so I work with them.
Great.
It's a behavioral program, day program, like 6 locations in the East Bay, and so all these things are,
Yeah.
heart. And then,
Yeah, yeah.
my old